Midnight patrol dead quiet. The usual stink of synth oil and piss hung in the smog of Titan's lower hive. Kale kept to the shadows. His pulse rifle felt like a part of his arm, cold and familiar. 10 cycles on this rock, and the silence still felt wrong. It was the kind of quiet that came before the screaming. He moved along the gantry, boots silent on the rusted metal grid. Below, the alleyways were a maze of discarded shipping containers and collapsed scaffolding. A flicker of movement. Then a sound. Not loud. The wet crack of bone breaking. Kale stopped. He knelt at the edge of the gantry, peering down into the gloom. 3 figures cornering a fourth. He recognized their armor. Omnicorp SEC troopers. Corporate muscle, far from their designated sector. They were hunting. Their target was smaller, faster. A woman. She moved with a fluid grace that was not human. Even from this distance, he could see the dark stain spreading across her side. She was hurt. One of the troopers lunged, a shock baton crackling with blue energy. She spun under the attack, her legs scything out and shattering his knee. The trooper went down with a choked scream. Kale's eyebrow twitched. Impressive, but she was outnumbered and wounded. The other 2 closed in, their plasma pistols drawn. They were trying to take her alive. That made it interesting. Her skin shimmered in the faint neon glow from a broken sign. Patterns of light danced across her arms and face, shifting from a defensive blue to a furious, sharp crimson. Definitely not human. The fight was short and brutal. She was good, but the plasma burn on her side was slowing her down. She staggered after disarming one trooper, and the other slammed the butt of his pistol into her back. She hit the grimy pavement hard, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. Kale made his decision. It wasn't about her. It was about them. Omnicorp didn't operate on his turf. Not without paying a toll. He dropped from the gantry. He landed silently in the shadows behind a rusted delivery truck, the impact absorbed by the reinforced joints in his legs. The troopers were dragging her to her feet. Asset is compromised but viable. One of them grunted into his comms. Kale raised his rifle. The first shot was a low thrum, a kinetic pulse that wasn't loud enough to echo. It hit the first trooper in the back of the helmet. The helmet didn't shatter. It imploded. He dropped like a sack of wet synth meat. The second trooper spun around, raising his weapon. Too slow. Kale was already moving, closing the distance. The trooper fired a wild plasma bolt that sizzled against the container behind Kale's head. Kale slammed the rifle into the man's chest, cracking his armored plating and ribs. The trooper gasped for air he couldn't find. Kale ripped the plasma pistol from his hand and drove his vibro knife up under the man's jaw. A quick, efficient twist. The man slumped to the ground. The third trooper, the one with the broken knee, was trying to crawl away. Kale walked over and put a boot on his back. "Who's the asset?" Kale's voice was a low rasp. The trooper spat blood. "Go to hell." Kale applied more pressure. Bone crunched. "I'm already here," Kale said. "Talk." The trooper just gurgled. A waste of time. Kale ended it with a single, precise stomp to the back of the neck. 3 bodies in less than 10 seconds. The alley fell silent again, save for the drip of foul water from an overhead pipe. He turned. The woman was on her feet, leaning against the wall for support. She had the second trooper's plasma pistol in her hand, and it was aimed squarely at his chest. Her silver eyes were narrowed, filled with suspicion and pain. The crimson light on her skin pulsed like a warning beacon. "I didn't need your help, human." Her voice was a low hiss, melodic but laced with steel. He looked at the dark patch on her side, the way she held herself rigid against the pain. "Right," he said. He ignored the pistol. He took a step closer. The gun didn't waver. "You're bleeding out," he stated, his tone flat. "You'll attract scavengers. The 4-legged kind first, then the 2-legged." "I can handle scavengers," she retorted, her knuckles white on the grip of the pistol. "Not for long," he said. "That's a plasma burn. It'll fester without a proper seal." He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She knew he was right. He took another step. "Stay back." He kept walking. It was a gamble. She was proud, defiant. She might shoot him just to prove a point. But she was also smart. He could see it in her eyes. She was calculating the odds. Her survival versus her pride. Her breath hitched, and the pistol wavered for a fraction of a second. That was his opening. He closed the final few feet before she could steady her aim. Her eyes widened as he reached for the gun. Then her strength gave out. The defiance drained from her face, replaced by a wave of exhaustion and pain. Her silver eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. Kale caught her. She was lighter than she looked, but solid, all dense muscle and bone. The pistol clattered to the ground. He grunted, adjusting his grip, and slung her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. It was efficient, impersonal. He glanced around the alley one last time. He retrieved the pistol, tucking it into his belt. He left the bodies. The scavengers could have them. The journey back to his hab unit was a silent one. He moved through the shadows and forgotten service tunnels, avoiding the main thoroughfares. She was a dead weight on his shoulder, her breathing shallow. He could feel the heat of her wound through his jacket. His hab was built into the cliff face at the edge of the hive, overlooking a chasm of perpetual smog. It was a reinforced security bunker from the old colonial wars. He'd retrofitted it himself. The door was a slab of pressure-treated steel that hissed open at his palm print. He carried her inside, and the door hissed shut behind them, sealing them in. The interior was Spartan. One room, a metal cot bolted to the floor, a workbench covered in disassembled weapon parts, a small nutrient paste dispenser, a single screen displaying security camera feeds of the exterior. No comfort, only function. He laid her down on the cot. She stirred, groaning softly. Her bioluminescent markings had faded to a dull, sickly blue. He went to a storage locker and pulled out his medkit. It was military grade, filled with synth skin applicators, trauma shears, and biogel. He returned to her side. Her eyes fluttered open. They tracked his every move, sharp and wary. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice rough. "Stopping the bleeding," he said, pulling on a pair of sterile gloves. He needed to get to the wound. Her suit was made of some kind of dark, metallic weave fabric he didn't recognize. It was scorched and melted around the burn. He picked up the trauma shears. "Don't touch me." He ignored her, cutting through the tough fabric. She flinched, but didn't have the strength to stop him. He cut away a section of the suit, exposing the injury. It was a nasty burn, deep and cauterized at the edges, but weeping plasma residue in the center. Her skin was a pale silver, cool to the touch where it wasn't burned. The glowing blue patterns pulsed faintly around the wound. He worked quickly, his movements precise and clinical. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic spray that made her hiss in pain and arch her back. He held her down with one hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "Stay still," he commanded. She glared at him, her jaw clenched, but she obeyed. He applied the biogel. It was a thick, translucent substance that sizzled as it made contact with her skin. It would seal the wound, kill any infection, and accelerate the healing process. He finished by applying a sterile dressing over the gel. Done. He stripped off his gloves and tossed them into the incinerator chute. When he turned back, she was watching him, her expression unreadable. The pain in her eyes had receded, replaced by a guarded curiosity. He went to the dispenser and got her a bulb of water and a nutrient paste packet. He tossed them onto the cot next to her. "Eat," he said. She eyed the packet with disdain. "I don't eat your food." "Suit yourself," he shrugged. "Star." He went to his workbench and began methodically cleaning his rifle, stripping it down piece by piece. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the air recyclers and the click of metal parts. He felt her eyes on his back. After a few minutes, he heard the faint crinkle of the packet opening. A small victory. He continued his work, giving her space. Finally, she spoke. "Why?" He didn't turn around. "Why what? Why help me?" Her voice was stronger now. He reassembled the firing mechanism of his rifle. "My turf," he said, the lie coming easily. "My rules. No unsanctioned kills." "You believe I would have been killed?" There was an edge of pride in her tone. "Eventually," he said. "You were slowing down." He heard her shift on the cot. "I am Xylia." He grunted in acknowledgement. "Kale." Another long silence. "You are a soldier," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I was," he corrected. "One does not stop being a soldier." He finally turned to look at her. She was sitting up now, her back against the cold metal wall. She looked regal, even in her torn suit, covered in grime. "Some of us try," he said. A loud clank from outside broke the tension. Kale was instantly alert. He moved to the monitor, his rifle in his hands. The screen showed a heavy transport shuttle landing on the rocky plateau outside his door. Omnicorp markings. "Shit. They found me," Xylia said, her voice tight. She was already on her feet, grabbing the plasma pistol he'd left on the bench. She looked unsteady, but her eyes burned with defiance. "Stay back," Kale ordered, moving to the door. "Out of sight. I will not hide. You will do as I say, or you can take your chances with them out there." Their eyes locked in a battle of wills. She finally gave a curt nod and retreated into the darkest corner of the room, melting into the shadows. A heavy pounding rattled the steel door. "Open up. Omnicorp security." Kale activated the external comm. "Private property," he said, his voice flat. "Piss off. We are tracking a fugitive asset, designation X7. Our sensors indicate the asset entered this vicinity." The voice was cold, authoritative. "Your sensors are broken," Kale said. "Nothing here but me. We require access to confirm. Cooperate, and there will be no trouble." Kale knew how this went. They would force their way in, kill him, and take her. He made a choice. He pressed the release, and the door hissed open a few inches, held by a thick chain. He stood in the opening, his bulk filling the space. Outside, a squad of 6 heavily armed troopers stood waiting. In front of them was an officer, his face grim and scarred, a commander's insignia on his collar. "I am Commander Forlag," the officer said. "I will ask you one more time. Have you seen a non-human female, silver eyes, cutaneous bioluminescence?" "Just me," Kale repeated, his expression bored. "Been that way for 5 cycles." Forlag raised a handheld scanner and pointed it at the doorway. It beeped. "Scanner reads 2 distinct life signs," Forlag said, his eyes narrowing. Kale didn't flinch. "Scanner's busted," he said smoothly. "My nutrient vat has a bioculture. Registers as a life sign sometimes. Faulty wiring." It was a weak lie. Paper thin. Forlag stared at him, weighing his options. Kale knew his reputation in the hive. The crazy ex-marine in the bunker. The one who killed 3 Skav gang members for getting too close to his door. He was more trouble than a random sweep was worth. "We will be monitoring this sector," Forlag said finally, lowering the scanner. "If you see anything, you will report it." "Sure," Kale said. "If we find you have been lying to us," Forlag added, his voice dropping to a threat, "we will burn this bunker to the ground with you inside it." "I'll keep that in mind," Kale said, and slammed the door shut. He engaged the heavy locking bolts. He stood there for a moment, his back to the room, listening as the shuttle's engines powered up and faded into the distance. He had just painted a target on his back. He turned around. Xylia had stepped out of the shadows. She was looking at him in a new way. The hostility was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "You lied for me," she said. "I don't like people knocking on my door," he replied, leaning his rifle against the wall. "They are not just Omnicorp," she said, her voice low. "The armor is a disguise. They are Vexian hegemony hunters. My sister's elite guard." Kale processed this. Vexian. A powerful, insular empire on the other side of the galaxy. "Your sister?" "She usurped my claim to the throne," Xylia said, her eyes turning hard as diamonds. "She sent them to bring me back. Or kill me." This was far more complicated than a simple corporate asset retrieval. He had just inserted himself into a royal succession war. "Great," he muttered. The days that followed were a tense truce. They were trapped in the bunker together. Forlag's patrols were constant, their transport visible on the monitors at all hours. Kale and Xylia moved around each other in the confined space like caged predators. They spoke little. He taught her how to operate the nutrient dispenser. She watched him maintain his weapons, her silver eyes sharp and analytical. He learned her patterns. She would meditate for hours, sitting perfectly still, her markings glowing a soft, tranquil blue. Then she would practice her combat forms, a silent, deadly dance in the center of the room. He found himself watching her more often than he cared to admit. The third night, he was woken by a sound. A soft whimper. He sat up on his floor mat. Xylia was thrashing on the cot, caught in a nightmare. Her bioluminescent markings were flickering erratically, flashing between fear blue and rage red. She cried out, a name in a language he didn't understand. He got up and crossed the room. He hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Xylia." She woke with a gasp, lashing out. Her fist connected with his jaw. It was a solid hit, and his head snapped back. He didn't retaliate. He just stood there as her eyes focused, and she realized what she'd done. The crimson on her skin faded, replaced by a pale, shimmering violet he hadn't seen before. She started, her voice shaking. "Bad dream," he said, rubbing his jaw. She looked away, towards the gray metal wall. They killed my royal guard, she whispered. All of them. They died for me. The words were heavy with guilt and grief. It was the first crack he had seen in her armor of defiance. He found himself responding, the words pulled from a place he kept locked away. Lost my squad on Cygnus X1, he said, his voice a low gravel. Bad intel. A trap. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not a defiant princess, but someone who understood loss. A bond was formed in that moment, forged in the shared silence of their respective hells. The tension in the bunker changed after that night. It was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer hostile. It was something else, something charged. He was cleaning his pulse rifle, the familiar ritual of comfort. She was practicing her forms, her movements sharp and precise. The small room seemed to shrink as she moved, her energy filling the space. You fight like you have nothing to lose, she observed, stopping her kata. I don't, he said without looking up from his work. She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. And you? He asked, his voice rough. She stopped just inches from his workbench, forcing him to look at her. I fight like I have everything to reclaim, she said, her silver eyes intense. The air between them crackled. He could smell the faint, ozone-like scent of her skin. Her markings were glowing that soft, curious violet again. You think I don't see it? She asked, her voice a low murmur. The way you watch me. He put down the piece of the rifle he was holding. You're in my space, he said. Hard not to. That is not the reason, she countered, taking another step closer. She was right next to him now. He could feel the warmth radiating from her. What do you want, Xylia? He asked, his voice tight. I want to know why a man who wants to be left alone would chain himself to another's war. Maybe I was bored, he said, his tone sardonic. A small smile touched her lips for the first time. It transformed her face. You are a terrible liar, Kale. She reached out and touched the faded military tattoo on his forearm. A stylized skull and crossbones with a star in the center. His skin tingled where she touched him. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, to rebuild the walls. He didn't move. You are not like the other humans I have met, she said softly. They are loud. Their minds are a chaotic storm. And me? You are quiet, she said, like a deep, still water. But there are monsters in your depths. He couldn't argue with that. The tension finally snapped. He wasn't sure who moved first. It was a collision. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her dark hair. Her hands came up to his chest, gripping the front of his shirt. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a clash of wills, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was all the frustration, the fear, the confinement of the past few days exploding into a single point of contact. He pushed her back against the cold wall of the bunker, his body pressing against hers. She met his aggression with her own, her lips hard against his, her fingers digging into his shoulders. This wasn't about comfort or affection. It was a raw, primal surrender to an instinct they had both been fighting. Her skin flared with a brilliant, hot gold light, illuminating the small room. He broke the kiss, breathing heavily, and stared down at her. Her eyes were dark, her pupils blown wide. She looked wild, beautiful, and dangerous. He lifted her effortlessly, and she wrapped her legs around his waist without breaking their gaze. He carried her the few steps to the cot and laid her down. Their clothes came off in a desperate tangle of limbs and torn fabric. It was a storm, a battle, a claiming. And in the middle of it, a quiet surrender. Afterwards, they lay on the narrow cot, the silence in the bunker different now. It was intimate, heavy. The air was thick with the scent of them, human and Vexian. Her markings had softened to a warm, gentle rose color, casting a soft glow on the metal ceiling. I don't do this, he said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. He stared at the ceiling, unable to look at her. He felt her shift beside him. She traced the jagged scar on his ribs with a single, cool finger. Neither do I, she replied, her voice a soft murmur. The dynamic between them had been shattered and reforged into something new, something more dangerous, something he couldn't name. The new peace was short-lived. The next day, the proximity alarm blared. Kale was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. Xylia was right behind him, her plasma pistol ready. On the monitor, Forlag's transport was back. But it wasn't alone. Two more were landing, deploying squads of heavily armed troopers. And they were wheeling a heavy weapon towards his door. A plasma cannon. They're done talking, Kale said grimly. We cannot fight them all, Xylia said, her eyes fixed on the screen. We don't have to, he said, moving to a loose panel in the floor. We just have to disappear. He pulled the panel up, revealing a dark, narrow opening. Old mining tunnel, he explained. Connects to the Underhive network. It's our only way out. The first plasma bolt hit the door. The entire bunker shook, and the lights flickered. The steel door glowed cherry red where the bolt had impacted. Go, he yelled. Xylia didn't hesitate. She swung her legs into the opening and disappeared into the darkness. A second blast hit the door. This time, the metal buckled and warped. Kale grabbed a spare power pack and his satchel of supplies, tossing them down into the tunnel. He turned and fired a burst from his rifle at the monitor screen, shattering it. No free intel. The third blast tore the door from its hinges. It flew across the room and slammed into the far wall with a deafening crash. Smoke and troopers poured into the room. Kale fired a suppressing burst, forcing them to take cover. He didn't wait to see if he hit anything. He dropped into the tunnel, pulling the panel closed just as a volley of plasma fire scorched the floor where he had been standing. The darkness was absolute. He landed on a pile of loose rock, Xylia's hand grabbing his arm to steady him. This way, she whispered. He was surprised she could see. Your eyes? Vexian royalty can see across multiple light spectrums, she explained, her voice a disembodied sound in the pitch black. It is useful. Follow me. She led him through the twisting, narrow tunnels. The air was stale and cold, smelling of damp earth and something metallic. Above them, they could hear the faint sounds of the troopers ransacking his home. His home, the place he had built to keep the world out. It was gone. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. They moved in silence for what felt like hours. Xylia navigated the labyrinthine tunnels with an unerring sense of direction. Kale followed, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip, his senses on high alert. They finally stopped in a large cavern, where a trickle of phosphorescent water ran down one wall, casting the space in an eerie green light. We should rest here, Xylia said. They will not follow us this far. The tunnels are unstable. Kale slid down the wall, his rifle across his lap. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. He had lost everything. His sanctuary, his isolation. All for a woman he'd met less than a week ago. He looked at her. She was drinking from the stream of glowing water, her face illuminated in the strange light. She looked like a goddess from some forgotten mythology. She met his gaze. You have questions, she said. A few, he admitted. She came and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. My sister, Lyra, she is not just ambitious, Xylia began, her voice low and somber. She is weak. She made a deal with your Omnicorp. They provide her with technology, weapons to secure her throne. In return, she gives them what they want. You, Kale, guessed. She nodded. But not just me. It is what I carry in my blood. A genetic key. Our dynasty was bred to control the ancient Vexian bioweapons, the Sentinels. They are planet killers, dormant for millennia. Without the key, they are just statues. With it, they can't just kill you. Kale finished, understanding dawning. They need you alive. And compliant, she added bitterly. Lyra would see me a slave to a human corporation if it meant she could wear the crown. The stakes had just been raised from a civil war to potential galactic annihilation. We can't keep running, Kale said, his voice hard. Omnicorp has outposts everywhere. Your sister's hunters will never stop. I know, Xylia agreed. Running is a coward's game. Her eyes glittered in the dim light. There is a communication relay on this moon's north pole, she said. An old, long-range transmitter, heavily fortified by Omnicorp. If I can get to it, I can send a coded message to the loyalist factions in my court. I can rally them. It was a desperate plan. Suicidal, even. A frontal assault on an Omnicorp base, Kale said, a dry, humorless smile on his face. What could go wrong? We would not be assaulting, she corrected. We would be infiltrating. Just the two of us. You are more than just a man, Kale, she said, her gaze steady and unwavering. And I am more than just a princess. He looked at her, at the quiet strength and fierce determination in her eyes. He was a loner, a survivor. He had spent years building a life of isolation, a life with no attachments. And now he was about to risk it all. He found he didn't care. "All right," he said. "Let's go start a war." The journey to the North Pole was a brutal test of survival. They traveled through the Underhive tunnels for 2 more days, emerging into the toxic, windswept plains of Titan's surface. The air was a thin, freezing soup of methane and nitrogen. Kale had his rebreather, but Xylia's Vexian physiology was surprisingly resilient. The cold bothered her, but the air wasn't lethal. They moved by night, hiding in rock formations during the long, dim days, avoiding Omnicorp patrols. They shared the last of his nutrient paste and drank filtered water. They talked more during that journey than they had in all their time in the bunker. He told her about his time in the Exomarines, the campaigns he'd fought, the friends he'd lost. She told him about her world, Vex, a planet of crystalline cities and deep, ancient traditions. She spoke of her sister, not with hatred, but with a deep, sorrowful pity. They learned each other's rhythms, the cadence of their breathing, the way they moved. They were becoming a unit. The relay station was a fortress, a jagged metal structure built into the side of a glacier, bristling with sensor arrays and weapon emplacements. "Getting in will be the easy part," Kale muttered, observing the base from a ridge a click away. "The comms tower is in the central spire," Xylia said, pointing. "That is my target. And my target," Kale said, "is to make sure you get there." They waited for the shift change. Under the cover of a methane blizzard, they made their move. Kale used a magnetic grapple to scale the perimeter fence, then cut a hole for Xylia. They moved like ghosts through the maintenance corridors, his tactical knowledge and her enhanced senses a perfect combination. She could hear the patrol patterns through the walls. He could read the security schematics on his data slate. They took out 2 guards with silent, non-lethal efficiency, hiding the bodies in a service duct. They reached the base of the central spire undetected. "This is it," Xylia said, looking up at the towering structure. "I'll create a diversion on the lower levels," Kale said. "It'll draw the main security force down. You go straight for the tower. Don't wait for me." She grabbed his arm. "Kale." He looked at her. Her silver eyes were filled with a fierce light. "Come back," she said. It wasn't an order. It was a plea. He gave her a curt nod. "Always do." He disappeared into the shadows. A few minutes later, the alarms blared. A series of small, controlled explosions rocked the lower levels, exactly as he'd planned. Xylia didn't waste the opportunity. She sprinted for the spire's access lift, the sound of running boots and shouted orders echoing behind her. The fight to the comms tower was a blur of violence. She moved with a deadly grace, her plasma pistol and her own combat skills a lethal combination. She was a whirlwind of motion, a princess forged in the crucible of war. She reached the command center at the top of the tower. It was a circular room, filled with holographic displays and control consoles. She ran to the main comms terminal and began frantically inputting the encryption keys for her message. Kale, meanwhile, was fighting a war on 3 fronts. He had turned the lower levels into a killing ground, using hit-and-run tactics to sow chaos and confusion. He was outnumbered 20-1, but he was in his element. This was what he was made for. He fought his way back towards the spire, his rifle hot, his ammunition running low. He had to get back to her. As Xylia finished typing the message, a life-sized hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. It was a woman who looked remarkably like her, but her eyes were cold and cruel. "Lyra." "Hello, sister." Lyra's voice dripped with condescending pity. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Xylia ignored her, her fingers flying across the console. "Always so dramatic," Lyra sighed. "I was hoping to take you alive, but you've become too much of a nuisance." Red lights began to flash around the room. A synthesized voice announced, "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Detonation in 5 minutes." "If I cannot have you, no one will, sister," Lyra sneered, and her hologram vanished. At that moment, the door to the command center slid open. Commander Forlag stood there, flanked by 4 of his elite Vexian hunters in Omnicorp armor. "It is over, Your Highness," Forlag said, his voice devoid of emotion. Xylia drew her pistol, but she knew it was hopeless. The message wasn't sent yet. It was still uploading. Then another figure appeared in the doorway behind Forelag. Kale. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his armor scorched and dented, but he was there. He raised his rifle. "Get away from her," he growled. The battle was sudden and savage. Kale opened fire, taking down one of the guards instantly. Forelag and the others returned fire, forcing him back. "Send the message," Kale roared at Xylia. She turned back to the console, protecting it with her body, her heart pounding in her chest. Uploading. 80%. Kale fought with a ferocity she had never seen. He was a cornered beast, a berserker. But he was outmatched. Forelag was a master combatant, and his men were the best of the best. Uploading. 90%. Kale took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, spinning him around. He grunted in pain, but kept firing. He saw Forelag take aim at the console, at Xylia. There was no time to think. He moved. He threw himself in front of the console, just as Forelag fired. The plasma bolt hit him square in the chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and slammed him against the console. He slid to the floor, his rifle clattering from his numb fingers. "Kale," Xylia screamed. "Upload complete." Message sent. Something inside Xylia broke. A dam of control she had maintained her entire life. She looked at Kale's still form, at the smoking hole in his chest, and a power she had never known she possessed erupted from her. A wave of pure, shimmering biokinetic energy exploded from her body. It slammed into Forelag and his men, lifting them into the air and throwing them against the far wall like dolls. They collapsed to the floor, unconscious, their armor sparking and smoking. Xylia rushed to Kale's side. She fell to her knees, cradling his head in her lap. "Kale," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No." His breathing was shallow, a ragged gurgle. The wound was catastrophic. The station shuddered violently around them. Detonation in 60 seconds. "I am not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce. A massive explosion tore a hole in the roof of the command center. Dust and debris rained down. A ship was hovering above them. A Vexian battlecruiser, its design sleek and predatory. A rescue line snaked down through the hole. "My queen," a voice boomed from the ship's external speakers. "We received your message. We must go now." Xylia looked from the line to Kale's face. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Go," he rasped, coughing up blood. "Together," she said, her voice unbreakable. With strength born of desperation, she hauled him to his feet, draping his arm over her shoulders. She half-carried, half-dragged him to the line, securing him to the harness, then to herself. "Pull us up," she screamed. They were lifted into the air just as the relay station exploded beneath them in a brilliant, silent flash of light. Weeks later, the view from the bridge of the Vexian flagship, the Starfire, was a tapestry of stars. Xylia stood at the command console, dressed not in a battle suit, but in the formal silver and black regalia of a Vexian queen. Her fleet had answered her call. They had swept through the usurper's forces, retaking the capital world of Vex in a swift and decisive campaign. Lyra had fled, but her power was broken. Xylia was queen. She was addressing her assembled commanders via a fleet-wide hologram. "And we owe this victory to the courage of our loyalist forces, to the strength of our people," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with authority. Beside her, a step back from the console, stood Kale. He was alive. The Vexian medics had saved him, their technology far beyond anything he had ever seen. He was scarred, a brutal new map of his survival etched across his chest. He wore simple human fatigues, looking starkly out of place amidst the ornate Vexian bridge crew. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "But our victory was not won alone," Xylia continued, turning from the hologram to face him. The camera feeds followed her movement, broadcasting his image to the entire fleet. "We owe our victory to the courage of an ally. To one in particular." She walked to him, stopping directly in front of him. The bridge was silent, every eye upon them. "He fought for a people not his own," she declared, her voice resonating with emotion. "He bled for a queen he did not know." She took his hand, her cool fingers lacing with his. Her bioluminescent markings, which had been a calm, royal blue, began to pulse with a brilliant, steady gold. "He is not merely my ally," she said, her voice softening but losing none of its power. "He is my shield, my consort." A murmur went through the bridge crew and through the thousands of Vexian soldiers watching across the fleet. She raised their joined hands. He is my king. She pulled him closer and kissed him. It was not the desperate, violent kiss from the bunker. It was a kiss of promise, of declaration, of absolute certainty. A public seal on a private bond. When she pulled back, the entire bridge crew, as one, slammed their right fists against their armored chests. A booming, thunderous salute that echoed through the ship. A salute for their queen. And for her king. Later, they were alone on the observation deck. The vast starfield stretched out before them, a silent, glittering expanse. His wounds ached with the memory of plasma. Her crown, a delicate crystalline circlet, sat on a nearby console. King, he said, the word feeling strange in his mouth. A dry smirk touched his lips. Doesn't have a great ring to it. She leaned against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. He could feel the steady, calm pulse of the golden light from her skin. You will get used to it, she murmured, her voice laced with amusement. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the distant nebulae swirl. It's not over, he said finally. No, she agreed. Lyra is still out there. Omnicorp will not forget this humiliation. They will want their investment back. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. She felt solid, real, a grounding force in a galaxy that had suddenly become vast and complicated. His isolation was shattered. Her exile was over. Let them come, he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. Their fight wasn't finished. It had just begun. But now, they would face it together. The new reality was a strange fit. Kale walked the corridors of the Starfire, a ghost in his own life. Vexian warriors, tall and severe with their silver eyes, would nod to him, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion. He was the anomaly, the primitive human who had somehow won the Queen's favor. He spent most of his time in the ship's armory. It was the only place that felt familiar. The smell of weapon lubricants and charged power cells was a universal constant. He broke down their plasma rifles, studied their energy shielding. He learned. He adapted. Xylia was consumed by her new duties. Rebuilding a government, purging traitors, negotiating with loyalist houses. He saw her mostly at the end of the long cycles, when she would come to his Spartan quarters, the weight of her crown visible in the exhaustion in her eyes. She would shed her royal robes and lie with him on the simple cot he had requested. In the dark, she was not a queen. She was just Xylia, and he was just Kale. They questioned my choice, she said one night, her voice muffled against his chest. I know, he said. He could feel the stares in the hallways. He heard the whispers when he entered a room. They say a human cannot understand our ways. That you will be a weakness. Are you weak, Xylia? He asked, his voice rough. She pulled back to look at him, her markings glowing a soft, indignant blue. No. Then it doesn't matter what they say, he said simply. He was her choice. Her anchor. He didn't need a crown or a title. He just needed to be the man she turned to when the weight became too much. That was a role he understood. The first test came sooner than they expected. A distress call from a Vexian mining colony in the borderlands. Raiders. But the attack patterns were too organized, the weapons too advanced for common pirates. Omnicorp. Xylia convened her war council. Her generals, stern and proud Vexian nobles, debated strategy. Kale stood in the corner of the strategy room, listening. They planned a full fleet assault. A show of overwhelming force. It's a trap, Kale said, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to him. One of the generals, a hard-faced veteran named Korth, sneered. And what would a human know of Vexian strategy? I know corporate strategy. Kale countered, stepping forward. Omnicorp doesn't do frontal assaults. They do ambushes. They're trying to draw the fleet into the asteroid field near the colony. They'll have heavy cannons hidden on the rocks. They'll tear you to pieces. Korth scoffed. Our shields can withstand any corporate weapon. Not if they use torpedoes with plasma warheads designed to overload your emitters, Kale shot back. They'll fire in a saturation volley. The first wave drops the shields, the second guts the ships. He knew their tactics. He'd fought against them before. Xylia looked at him, then at her generals. He is right, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. It is too obvious. Too simple. She turned to Kale. What do you propose? He walked to the holographic map. A surgical strike, he said. A small, fast ship. We bypass the main fleet and go straight for their command vessel, which will be hiding on the far side of the colony's moon. Cut off the head, and the body will die. A suicide mission, Korth declared. A soldier's mission, Kale corrected. Xylia's eyes gleamed. Prepare my personal shuttle, she commanded. And a squad of your finest Marines, General Korth. She looked at Kale. You and I will lead the strike. The mission was a tense, silent run through the cosmos. Their small ship, the Shadowfang, slipped past the Omnicorp blockade, just as Kale had predicted. They found the command ship, a corporate destroyer, lurking in the shadow of the moon. How did you know? Xylia asked, standing beside him on the shuttle's small bridge. Corporations are predictable, he said. They value assets over people. The commander will always stay as far from the fight as possible. They boarded the destroyer. It was a brutal, close-quarters fight through the sterile white corridors of the ship. Kale and Xylia fought back-to-back, a seamless unit of human grit and Vexian grace. His pulse rifle and her plasma pistol. His brute force and her lightning speed. They were a storm of destruction. They reached the bridge. The corporate commander, a smug-looking man in a clean uniform, stared at them in disbelief. Surrender, Xylia commanded, her voice cold as space. The commander smirked. I don't think so. He pressed a button on his console. A holographic image of Lyra appeared. Sister, Lyra said with a mock pout. You've ruined another of my business ventures. It's over, Lyra, Xylia said. Oh, it's just beginning, Lyra purred. This was just a test. To see how you would react. To see how much you rely on your human pet. The ship shuddered. I've initiated a core meltdown, the commander said calmly. We all die together. Kale didn't hesitate. He shot the commander. He turned to Xylia. Get your Marines out of here. I'll stop the meltdown. No, she said, her voice firm. We do this together. They fought their way to engineering, the ship tearing itself apart around them. They managed to eject the core just moments before it went critical. The resulting explosion buffeted their shuttle as they escaped. Back on the Starfire, they had won. The Omnicorp fleet, leaderless and confused, was routed by the Vexian Navy. In the War Council, General Korth approached Kale. The old warrior looked at him, his silver eyes filled with a new respect. He slammed his fist to his chest in the Vexian salute. My king, he said, his voice gruff. The other generals followed suit. Kale just nodded. He wasn't a king. He was a soldier. And he had found a war worth fighting. He had found his queen. Their life settled into a new rhythm. Threats rose, and they put them down. A pirate lord, a rogue general, another corporate incursion. With every victory, their legend grew. The defiant queen and her human shadow. They were two halves of a single weapon. But in the quiet moments, in the dark of their quarters, they were just a man and a woman who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives. He was teaching her to play cards, a simple human game from his military days. She was a terrible bluffer. Her markings betrayed her every time. A good hand would make a faint golden pattern appear on her temples. You're cheating, she accused, throwing her cards down in mock frustration. I'm just observant, he said with a rare, small smile. She tackled him, and they wrestled on the floor like children, her laughter echoing in the sterile room. In those moments, he felt a contentment he had never thought possible. He had spent his life running from connection, from purpose. And now he was at the heart of it, bound to a woman who was the center of a galaxy's turmoil. He wouldn't have it any other way. One day, a transmission came. A coded, private channel, for Xylia's eyes only. It was Lyra, not a hologram. A live feed. She looked haggard, her usual cruel confidence replaced by a desperate fear. Sister, she began, her voice trembling. I was wrong. Omnicorp. They were just using me. They have something. Something called the Prometheus Project. They're not after the Sentinels to control them. They want to dissect them. To create a plague that targets only Vexian DNA. Xylia's face went pale. A genocide. They have a hidden research facility in the Phantom Nebula, Lyra continued, tears in her eyes. They have me, Xylia. They know I am of no more use. They are going to use me as the first test subject. The transmission cut out. Xylia stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists. Kale put a hand on her shoulder. It's a trap, he said softly. I know, she whispered. But it's my sister. He knew what she was going to do. And he knew he was going with her. This was it. The final confrontation. The endgame. They would go into the heart of the beast, just the two of them. Not as a queen and her king, but as two warriors with everything to lose and a galaxy to save. Their future was uncertain, a path shrouded in shadow and war. But as he looked at her, at the fire in her silver eyes, he knew one thing for sure. As long as they were together, they were invincible. Their bond was no longer just a choice. It was destiny. A destiny they would carve from the stars with blood and steel. And he was ready. For her, he would burn galaxies.